In a world where the quality of information available to poorer communities is doctored, tainted and sometimes regressive, where the words fake news have come to mean other people's opinions, it is vital to rely on news platforms with journalists who have feet on the ground and can report the truth. New York Parrot, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your product and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York Parrot, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the website they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our new site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York Parrot is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.
Good morning, everyone. It's Billy Bob, and we are doing our weekly program, the Foreign Policy Review. I have co-host Carlo Parcelli. Dustin Pickering is on assignment. He's not able to join us today. We offered a late invite to Christopher C. Black, world-renowned lawyer and human rights advocate, geopolitical analyst. He was gracious enough to accept our invitation, come on our show today. He recently wrote an article regarding the situation in Russia, the escalation with the assassination of the daughter of, I forget his first name, Mr. Dugin. He's, a Russian philosopher. And, ostensibly the assassination attempt meant to kill him, and it killed his daughter instead. Christopher Black has written an excellent article about that whole situation, so we wanted to get him on the show and discuss all that with him. So thankfully, he's agreed to join us, and we want to just have an informal discussion. There's a lot going on. This is, a truly epic and interesting time that we're all living in with these huge geopolitical shifts. So, let's throw it over to Carlo. He has perhaps one or two things to say, and then we'll get into the broader discussion. Any comments, Carlo, before we bring on Chris?
No. I think we just jump in with Chris.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Chris, let's start with this. It's my understanding that maybe today in the Russian Duma, they're going to be voting on on legislation, legally defining Ukraine as a terrorist state or a state sponsor of terrorism, and this could have big implications. Is that an okay place to start, and then we can take it from there?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. I've heard of that, but I've only heard that through the military summary channel. I haven't seen any report of that in the Russian press. Maybe this may be the case. It's something happening in the Duma today.
Okay.
But if that is the case, well, that would have deep repercussions. Yeah.
Okay, so I did hear it on the military summary channel as well. I Googled it, and I saw. I didn't see a whole lot. You're right. So who knows? That could just be an unsubstantiated rumor. That's definitely possible. Alternatively, like you said, if because of this assassination and these terrorist activities going on in within Russia itself, how could that change Russia's approach to the whole military operation?
Yeah. Well, it would be as he summarized on his channel when he speculated about this suggestion that they might do this, it would mean that they could do almost anything they wanted in their own legal terms, just
Right.
like the United States sort of passes laws so they can justify domestically attacking a country or something. So that would give them carte blanche to attack the leadership of Kiev and other officials, even, and then of course all the countries supporting Ukraine would be sponsors of terrorism, and that would have all the ramifications we've seen when the United States declares Iran a sponsor of terrorism, with Cuba and North Korea and so on. These sanctions, there'd be all sorts of economic aspects to it, and military aspects, which we can't predict because we don't know what the Russian high command has in mind, or the Russian government. But it could lead to all these things. I'm not sure they're going to go there, but we'll see today, I suppose, by the end of the day, what's really going on in the Duma today.
So, would you be able to, for maybe we have viewers that aren't really familiar with what the events that transpired recently? Would you like to just maybe summarize your article and go over the basic events that took place for anybody that might not be up to speed?
Sure. Well, assuming the reports from Russia are accurate, and I think they seem to be, Daria Dugina, who is the daughter of Alexander Dugin, who is, as you rightly say, a Russian philosopher and intellectual, conservative, not pro-communist, he's not a Nazi either, but he's a true conservative, I would take it. His daughter was killed in a car bomb on Saturday evening after she and her father attended a lecture outside Moscow. And we don't know if the true target was him or her. It would make sense it was him because he is a more important figure, though Daria Dugina was an important journalist covering the war in Ukraine and quite outspoken and in support of Russia's actions there. But apparently he decided not to get in. They drove in one car, but he decided to go home with somebody else, and she drove the car home, and and she was killed. The FSB, or Russian police, think maybe she was the target because it seemed to be a controlled bombing. That is, wasn't timed. The lady that they accused of doing it, Natalia Vivovk, a Ukrainian special services agent, it appears, controlled the bomb. So she must have seen who was in the car, or maybe she thought two people were in the car. We don't know. And anyway, after the bombing, this lady and with her 12-year-old daughter fled to Estonia. And now we don't know where she is. But she had entered Russia using false Donetsk plates, Republic plates, false ID, and had a 12-year-old daughter with her to give her a cover as a non-dangerous person, I suppose, that to affect the border guards. And she entered Russia, stayed in a hotel in Moscow. They went to this lecture, planted this bomb in the car, then left and changed plates again and drove into Ukraine, into Estonia using Ukraine plates. She's reputed to be a member of the images of her on media of her in uniform of Ukraine military uniform, and they're claiming she was a former member or affiliated with the Nazi Azov battalion, which large elements of were destroyed by the Russian army in Mariupol back in March, but still have some elements existing in Ukraine today, still fighting. So that's the nub of it. It was a murder by a Western agent, by a Ukraine agent of a civilian in Russia, a murder. And the point, I decided to write the article because there was almost no condemnation of this murder by anybody in the West, in the Western governments, and they seemed to approve it, which made them complicit in the murder. And it's quite clearly NATO must have known that this operation was going to take place because of the ramifications of it, which makes them complicit. And we remember that, for instance, when as I mentioned, the incident with the Skripals in England a few years back, the British claimed that the Russians tried to poison Mr. Skripal and his daughter Julia with Novichok, a banned toxic chemical. and claimed that Russia did it, and raised all sorts of commotion in the world political scene. Used it as a pretext to impose sanctions on economic warfare on Russia, and cried hell and to fury that Putin was an evil man, the Russians were murderous and assassins. And then they accused him of killing another lady a few months later from the same substance in UK. They accused Russia of trying to poison Mr. Navalny, which was not true. But there's a big hue and cry in all the Western press and all the Western governments using these alleged Russian crimes to attack Russia. And yet when a Western agent murders a Russian in Russia, there's no reaction whatsoever. And the hypocrisy of that just tore me. I just couldn't sit quiet and let that go by because I didn't see anybody else writing about it. So I decided to write something about it, and that's what I wrote. And
so it's a great article.
In summary, that this is another sign. I've said this before many times, that the lack of morality and the hypocrisy shows that what we thought as the enlightened West, I mean, enlightened and the big E word, enlightened, which came out of the Renaissance in the 1400s and try to restore classical ideas and humanity, the ideas of classical humanity from the Romans and the Greeks and so on and so forth, is dying and maybe dead now, because they're quite clearly willing to murder people and get away with it and start wars and massacre people. And so what is the West? The West that we knew as an enlightened beacon of democracy and liberalism and socialism, even because Marx came out of that, and Lenin, it's just gone. It's gone. It's dead. What is it? It doesn't exist. It's just a. The emperor has no clothes, really.
Let's talk a little bit. I couldn't agree with you more. The hypocrisy. The West is, there's no redeeming qualities, it seems. I mean, but so Mr. Dugan, there's a different things are being said about him in the West. And so everybody, I have my own opinion, but there's definitely the Western establishment media, they call him, Putin's brain. I've heard Putin's brain, and a very influential philosopher in the Kremlin who is, kind of the brains behind their whole new strategy for a new Russian empire. So that's what the establishment press says. Now, the part of the left, I would call the unprincipled left, the compatible left that's compatible with imperialism, the pseudo left. They call Dugan a Nazi, a fascist, and they're not shedding any tears over this.
No.
And you've actually were a little bit attacked on your article because you dared to express sympathy and support for Russia and for the family. And so the pseudo left that sees him as a Nazi then attacks you as a Nazi. It's really silly.
Well, it's quite clear that attack was meant to stop people from reading the article, and the attack was made. I've been attacked like this before, but it doesn't make any sense. First of all, Alexander Dugin is not a fascist or a Nazi at all. He hates the Nazis. He is just a true conservative. I mean, not like your Republicans, like maybe the old conservative with a small c. We grew up with reading about Thomas Hobbes and John Locke and all these people. So he's far from being a fascist. And from what I understand, I haven't read a lot of his work, but from what I have read, he seems to be advocating restoration of Russia's integrity and sovereignty and cultural sovereignty, which is being undermined by, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, all the Western carpetbaggers went in and tried to change Russia into some sort of version of the United States. And he's just trying to push back against that, as every culture would. And he expresses that opinion in Russia. But he's far from what I understand, he's far from having any influence in the Kremlin whatsoever. I mean, I don't think Putin's even met him. and never refers to him. And I think Dugin put out an article quite strident about Ukraine, and Putin complained about it. So they're manufacturing Dugin as a powerful figure behind the throne in the Kremlin, or some sort of advocate of Russian Empire, in order to then justify this murder. And it's actually quite sickening to see people try and justify a murder by claiming that the victim and the victim's daughter, or the true victim and the father, had political views of their own, as if that justifies murder. And that's what they're doing. And when, for instance, the guy that attacked me, Steve Gowans, who I once used to be impressed by, I used to read his articles, accuses me of two strange things: Hitler and Oswald Spengler at the same time. And I don't understand the two, because Oswald Spengler hated Hitler, thought he was an idiot. So, and then Spengler had these, but Spengler did have this, his famous book, Decline and Fall of the West, written in the 1920s, which describes, in his view, his theory that cultures and societies go through stages, and then they rise and fall, and that seems to be the trend in history. Though he rejected Hegel's idea that it was some sort of divine inspiration, divine plan for this. He doesn't believe in any of that. And Spengler predicted in 1934 or 5 that in 10 years Germany would be destroyed, would be ceased to exist with the people in power when Hitler came to power. So he doesn't understand, I don't think, what Spengler said, or maybe he hasn't read Spengler. If he has, he doesn't understand it well. And to label me Hitler when I'm a communist is a bit much. I mean, but this is the typical of the push in the West to put together, to make the complaint or claim that communists and fascists are equally brutal, and they're both the same in that way, equally bad. When it's quite clear that socialist communists are opposed to fascism, opposed to everything Hitler, Mussolini, and the present governments in the West stand for. But by using that attack, they're really just they don't care if people understand it or it makes sense. That's not the point. Just trying to get an emotional reaction. Don't read this article.
So,
and that's the end of that.
Before we get too far, one of the viewers did just ask where they can read the article. And so I'm definitely going to link to it on my Facebook page. I'm going to link to it on the YouTube of this video. But I know it's New Eastern Outlook. But the problem is New Eastern Outlook is often blocked by different web browsers.
Right.
They've been under attack. But that's definitely one place they can go to read the article. Right, Chris?
Yeah. So there's a mirror version on my blog, which I posted on Facebook as well. I can send you the link later.
Okay.
But it's One Voice of the World at ChristopherBlack.com. You'll find it there.
Okay, so that's the URL is One Voice of the World, ChristopherBlack.com.
Well, it's probably just ChristopherBlack.com, but the name of the site is One Voice of the World.
So they can Google that and probably track it down. So we're touching on this. Opposing views on the left, and again, I'm really critical of the left that has, the certain view that what's going on right now is an inter-imperialist rivalry, inter-imperialist struggle between two empires, the US and Russia, and that as the working class, we ought not to support one side or the other. So this is Stephen Gowans, where he's coming from. This is where a lot of, I want to get my scare quotes in, a lot of leftists, have this approach, that, that's what's going on. And I think this is the fundamental divide. So, it doesn't make a lot of sense because, like we've talked about earlier, there's it's unipolarism. We've had unipolarism since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989. And, to think that there's more than one empire out there seems fantastic. And we've had Luciana Bone on here, and she was able to talk about how, you have a class struggle where you have the wealthy elite exploiting the poor, the underclasses, but that also translates into nations where you have a few advanced, rich, wealthy nations that exploit the poor developing nations. So, that's Leninism. That's Leninism. And so when these leftists point out that, when we support Russia in their anti-imperialism, that we're not engaging in Lenin's understanding of imperialism, I just so that's kind of what I'm addressing with Gowans on Twitter, where I'm in the middle of a back and forth. But can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Well, I agree with you completely. And Luciana, she's always got a very astute analysis of everything. So I have to agree with her. It's a ludicrous to claim that Russia is some sort of capitalist empire. People who claim that quite clearly are inventing this because they want to be on NATO's side. They've decided to go with NATO because it's safe. It's quite clear that all the left in the NATO countries has gone this. Well, not all the left, but a large part of it has gone this way in the NATO countries. And yet in the non-NATO countries, the left has not done this. The communist parties are all over the world, from Cuba to South Africa to China to India and elsewhere, Vietnam, all support Russia. It's only in the NATO countries that the left, as in the First World War, who claimed to be against war and for peace, suddenly jump on board the war wagon and then invent these stories. And the story they've invented is that somehow this is not an aggression by NATO against Russia, which Russia is defending itself against, which is the case. But somehow it's just a fight between two gangsters, one empire against the other, and who cares? Let them destroy each other. It's nothing to do with the working class. It has everything to do with the working class, because we remember that when the American embargo on the Soviet Union from 1945 onwards helped bring down the socialist government in the Soviet Union and destroyed the Soviet Union, what came out of that? A rump state. Russia and then all the other republics broke away. So how can you say that Russia is an imperialist state when it's just the rump state part of the Soviet Union? And immediately after it collapsed, the American capitalists and financiers and carpetbaggers went into Moscow and everywhere and basically destroyed that country. They reduced it to poverty and misery. They broke its economy. They destroyed everything, free education, everything was gone. Millions of people died. There was a civil war. Thousands and thousands were killed. It wasn't peaceful like people claim. And literally millions of people in Russia died from starvation, lack of health care, suicide, depression, and births dropped off. So that lasted almost 10 years under Yeltsin, Gorbachev and Yeltsin and his buddies, who were all basically American agents. So at that point, Russia was a comprador state controlled by the United States. How then, just 10 years later, or 15 years later, can they claim that now Russia's a big empire? What's happened is that the colonial status they had reduced Russia to has been finally overthrown by patriotic forces that came forward through the Mr. Putin, who was brought forth, we don't really know by whom, but we can suspect elements of the previous government in the Soviet Union and forces allied to them. And the Communist Party, which is still the largest party in Russia under Mr. Zhuganov, who supports him and this war, although they oppose his economic policies. So Russia has spent the last 15 years trying to come out of that mess. It was reduced to almost third world status, except it had nuclear weapons, but it's an odd thing. But now they've come back, and as soon as Putin made a speech in 2007 that Russia's not going to be this doormat anymore, we're gonna restore ourselves to what we used to be as an independent sovereign country. Then they began turning the screws on Russia, and they began and they had moved NATO east when the Red Army evacuated Eastern Germany and the rest of Eastern Europe in the early 90s. on the understanding that NATO would not go into those areas and occupy those bases the Soviet army had left. Well, NATO lied and reneged on that and moved their forces east. And why were they moving them east? Not to defend themselves against Little Russia, which was destroyed, but because now they wanted to break up Russia completely into separate pieces. And they meant to attack Russia. And they spent the last few years trying to build this missile system from Bulgaria up through the Baltic. And in September, they were going to complete the line with missile systems placed in Ukraine, which would have the ability to launch nuclear strike against Moscow within minutes. And they also planned a massive offensive against the Donbass republics in March. And it's quite clear that was the case. That's why they had 200,000 men in the Donbass area when Russia went in, because those forces were massed to attack the Donbass and push further into Russia, because they wanted to start a war inside Russia and have Russia deal with it inside Russia. So Russia had to act. Any other nation would have done the same. They were forced, and they didn't want to, but they were forced to respond. Otherwise, they would commit suicide. But
it wasn't like it was a surprise. Like, Western analysts had been saying for decades, if the West continues on this course of eastward expansion and eastward aggression, inevitably Russia, it's gonna be war with Russia, and they knew that. Putin made it clear. I mean, he tried diplomacy right before the military operation. He sent in writing to the State Department, "Hey, look, these are what these are legitimate security concerns, and you guys need to address them and respect them, because if not, like, we're gonna have to." And so it was a deliberate provocation. I mean, they provoked Russia on purpose. You mentioned you mentioned Putin. There was a time when George W. Bush met with him and looked into his eyes, and he thought, this is a puppet I can work with. He's no different than Yeltsin or Gorbachev. And there was hope. There was hope in the West that Putin would be somebody they could work with. But by 2007, like you said, it became clear that Putin was not going to just be another Yeltsin. Thank goodness for that. Right. Carlo, you're very quiet today, and I'm sorry for monopolizing. You probably got points to say.
Well, I did want to interject a couple of things. First of all, very obviously on the imperial front, all you have to do is look at the number of foreign bases that the United States has compared to Russia. It's ludicrous. But I also wanted to point out about Alexander Dugin's writings, which when he became news, I began to read with some attention. And it reminded me so much of the situation between governments and philosophers and poets, for example. Heidegger and Pound come to mind, and the notion of practicality. I mean, when I was reading Dugin, he simply does not have the practical dimension that would translate into governance. It's not there. It's just not there. And the other thing I wanted to, and it's with Heidegger, it wasn't there. And he was obviously embraced fascism, as did Pound in a very ugly way. But neither of them had especially in the Poundian case, I mean, provided a practical outlook for governance. It just wasn't there. And I feel that Dugin is the same thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is that my friend Doug Valentine insists at the Central Intelligence Agency that Zelensky doesn't wipe his ass without asking the CIA if he can do it, and whether he should wipe forward or backward or whatever. But and the CIA is behind, as well as NATO, behind the bombing of Dugin's daughter Daria, and he also has he also connects it to the Phoenix program in Vietnam, which I'm very familiar with. We won't go into that, but it's I think it's a good comparison. And the other thing he stresses is there has been a campaign of assassination of people who are pro-Russian within Ukraine. People who There's been dozens.
Yeah,
Dozens.
Let's pick that up because there's that publication that lists people that ought to be assassinated and murdered. So let's talk about that right after the break.
Okay.
Our producer is going to take us to break, hopefully, because I can't do it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely convince you.
Okay, so we're back. We were talking about, we had referenced before the break, this, I don't even know how to pronounce it, Miravets or some kind of a publication that it comes from the extreme right, from the ultranationalists in Ukraine, and they basically publish lists of enemies. And some of those enemies are even children, is my understanding. And it's basically a list of people that they say, if somebody wants to murder them, they are going to be doing a good deed. You know, it's going to be good to murder people on this list. So I believe Dugina, Alexander Dugin's daughter, was on the list. And there's a whole bunch of people that haven't been murdered on that list, but then there's a bunch of people that have been on that list that have been murdered. So it's really reprehensible. But Chris, do you have any better insight? Like, my understanding is pretty basic.
Well, no, I've heard of that, and you have to remember that since the coup in 2014, the NATO-backed coup that overthrew the legitimate government in Ukraine and imposed this pro-Nazi one under Poroshenko, then other people, then finally Zelensky. They banned the Communist Party. One of the first things they did, arrested many of its members, killed some, murdered some, burned its buildings. And we have to remember that at the last election, I think before that coup, the Communist Party got almost 20% of the vote. They were quite popular. So they were a major party. Nothing to be sneezed at. But now nobody mentions the fact they've been banned and his members murdered and still hunted down, and they've gone underground. And then their members are still being hunted. But that's okay in the democratic West because you're free to think what they want you to think and nothing else. So, but going back to Carlo's reference to the bases, it's true that what bases does Russia have around the world? One in Syria. And for the left to compare Russia as an imperialist state, when we remember the Soviet Union was one of the great liberators of the third world from Western colonialism, all across Africa and Latin America and Southeast Asia. And without the Russian air defense forces helping North Vietnamese to shoot down all those, that war may have gone a different way. So the Soviet Union has a history, and Russia has a history of helping third world countries liberate themselves from Western imperialism. And we're seeing the same sort of sense coming out of Russia now, that they see themselves now as a continuation of that in some strange way, as liberators of the world from Western imperialism. And then to say, for the left to say that when this country, which is being dominated by the West and almost destroyed by the West, and they're trying to destroy it again, resists. And we've always said, somebody would resist the West, the United States, and put them in their place. When finally somebody does it, what happens to the left, which should be clapping and applauding and supporting this? They fall over and join the enemy and join the Western imperialists by playing this neither here nor there game. I'm not for Russia. Russia's bad. Russia's brutal. The invasion's illegal. I'm not getting into this, which means they support NATO. That's what it comes down to. And the rest is just, excuse my language, bullshit. That's it. And that's what we're faced with in this world. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Dugan, I mean, I don't know much about Dugin's writing. I'm not sure it's even important whether what we think of Dugin's writing, because he's not a major figure in Russia. I mean, he's an important intellectual, but
he's built up more in the West than his influence is exaggerated.
Right.
His prestige within Russia is exaggerated, and he's kind of an opportunist. He's kind of glad to have this Western press, but then again, the West can use that to demonize Russia too.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, he's not a Solzhenitsyn like he's not that. I mean, Solzhenitsyn's a philosopher and a writer, but he lied about everything. But he's very famous in the West. So Dugin's not. He wasn't famous until this murder. Now they've made him famous. So trying to, because they want to smear, they want to justify the murder by portraying him as some sort of. I mean, if you can justify a murder like that, which you cannot. But the Phoenix program, Carlo mentioned, yes, we all remember. Well, maybe younger ones don't remember that the assassination program the United States ran in Vietnam. They killed, I think, thousands of people were assassinated for being communists or suspected communists or Viet Cong. And they carried out the COINTELPRO operation and Operation Condor in Latin America, where they assassinated and murdered tens of thousands of leftists. What they did in Indonesia, 500,000 people murdered. And what's happened to the Skripals? I asked about that. Nobody tells you where the Skripals are, dead or alive. So we're living in a world where they can kill you and nothing will be, they could do it to you and me and nothing will be said about it. And if anybody complains, they'll portray us as, well, they sort of deserved it in a way because of their big mouths, So this is the world we live in, and it's very dark, and we can't rely on the law anymore. We can't rely on decency anymore in government because it doesn't exist.
I think the escalation, I mean, this is a Western escalation, and the intent is to force Russia to engage in security measures. Like they have to, any responsible government is going to have to protect their people and increase security measures, which is going to lead to, then the West can use those security measures and attack them for being repressive, right? And for not allowing the freedom of their citizens. And they're gonna, hit that button as hard and as fast as they can. So that's the game that empire always plays. They destabilize, and then when the government that they're actively destabilizing through programs of assassination, like we just talked about, when they go to defend themselves against that, then the propaganda apparatus kicks in, and that country is accused of being draconian, tyrannical, and not caring about freedoms. That's the basic imperial playbook that we've seen.
And I've seen some articles where it's quite clear that I saw the CBC posted a report the other day, which clearly tried to spin the story. So in order to blame Russian secret services for the murder, to blame Ukraine, that's the kind of spin they're putting on it.
Just like Russia's bombing their own troops at the nuclear power plant, right?
Right.
Yeah, same thing.
It's laughable.
Or bombing or killing the 57 criminals that were held in the Russision prison, when clearly they're just a bunch of Nazis that
wanted to shut up.
Didn't want talking.
Yeah.
Spilling the beans. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's just ludicrous. I mean, all these claims are absurd when you look at them. I mean, why would Russia attack its own men and its at the nuclear plant? Why would Russia bomb with missiles, expensive missiles, a prison camp to kill prisoners when their guards could have just taken them out into the fields and lined them up and shot them without anybody knowing about it? I mean, it's just absurd. It's what people are trying to believe is absurd.
But the Western press, of course,
they're executing they're executing people who try and desert. They're executing people who refuse to join the army. But the idea that the West thinks that by, say, conducting this assassination, and that there's going to be a reaction in Russia whereby the Russians all cower in fear and collapse and don't support Putin is also absurd. And the Russians aren't going to do that. If there's any repressive measures, take more security measures, most Russians will support them. it is a question how this assassin got into the country. I mean, because there are many refugees fleeing from Ukraine into Russia, and they can infiltrate people in that refugee stream, and that's what they seem to have done. So Russia is going to have to improve its security, but they learn as they go, and there's still some people who have illusions there about what they're capable of, I suppose. But I don't think that this is going to have any effect on Russia's conduct in the war in Ukraine, which they're rapidly succeeding in their objectives, nor in its world diplomacy. Russia knows every trick in the book the United States can pull on the NATO ally. They're not going to change no matter what. They know before they started this operation what they could expect.
Yeah, they seem to be doing well on the military and economic fronts. Putin has not been more popular, I don't think, than he is right now.
That's an ironic thing that the United States attack on Russia has made Putin more popular. It was an interesting exchange I posted, and I think you guys mentioned it once, but at the meeting in the Kremlin a month or so ago, the leader of the Communist Party, Zyuganov, insisted to Putin that certain socialist principles have to be restored, and he said, yeah, that's a good idea. That's again, I don't know whether that was just trying to palm him off and placate him, but it didn't. It seemed sincere when he said we have to investigate those ideas and programs because socialism is a great thing. Which is making it work in a way. But again, that proves that how can Russia be an imperialist state when it's taking advice from the leader of the Communist Party, and the communists are still I think the single biggest party in Russia and growing. And the Communist Party supports this nation, this government in this operation. So,
yeah, contrasting what Ukraine has done with their Communist Party compared to the Communist Party of Russia being Putin's biggest political opposition, and they're on good terms, and they're the communists are very supportive of this military operation, and like you said, China also has been supportive. And China is showing how adopting socialist principles in the economy is beneficial. And so Putin's exactly right. He's a pragmatist. He's definitely not pro-Lenin. He's not pro-socialist, but he governs a popular coalition of different parties, the biggest party being the Communist Party. So to equate that with no different than the U.S. or, no better than the Ukrainian ultra nationalist government that has outlawed the Communist Party it seems a really poor analysis.
Yes, it's very shallow. People don't because in the Western press nobody mentions the Communist Party of Russia and its influence. I mean, they always say Navalny is the opposition and Navalny is a joke. But the biggest opposition party, and which has rallies constantly against the Russian government and pushed Putin a long time to recognize the republics and pushed for them to take some action. They're not mentioned in the West because the governments in the West don't want people to know the Communist Party still exists and it's still attractive to people there. They don't want people to know that communism is still attractive after 30 years of capitalism in Russia. So that's why it's never mentioned. And they always talk about Navalny, who's far right. Nobody cares about him in Russia.
I have two questions for you. The first one is, could you be a little more expansive on your response to Gowan's remarks? And secondly, and this is a kind of provocative question, what do you think of the American public and socialism? I mean, what do you think of the possibilities of there being a kind of socialist, I don't want to say revolution, but growth in this country?
Well, about Gowan's, I just sent a quick retort in saying he was a mistake. I forget what I said now, actually, but
okay.
I'm not going to respond to him too much more. He doesn't deserve it. If he wants to start a little fight with me on that, it's just going to drain my energy. You can say what he wants. I've had people say this about me for the last 30 years. About Rwanda, about defending Milosevic, I was called a fascist, and I've heard all this before. So I'm not going to say too much more unless he attacks me again. I'll reply. So I let other people defend me, perhaps. And your second question was about.
Yeah.
What was your point? The second one.
It was. We'll talk about China's socialist
I suppose in the United
government.
States, right?
Can it happen here?
Yeah. I'm an observer because I live close, not far from the United States, and I've been there many, many times, and I've met many.
You're in Canada, right?
The impression one gets from the outside without ever visiting there is that there is no such thing as socialism left in the United States. The Communist Party is weak and tepid.
Ever since Gus Hall, it's been downhill.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, that could change, hopefully, but and there are many what seem to claim to be left groups, but a lot of them turned out to be liberal groups. But when I'm there, and so we see just Republicans and Democrats, and neither one considers the election of their president valid. So neither member of any party considers the American elections valid anymore, which is an explosive situation. So we just see these two. The one business party, as Gore Vidal said it was, the one business party split into two factions, Republicans and Democrats, and you're squabbling about issues we can't really understand. So we don't, from outside, see much about socialism. But when I'm there and I talk to people, I've met many really strong socialists and very brave people who've risked a lot of things to try and create socialism in the United States, and a long history of that, from John Reed and all sorts of people up. Even Malcolm X was swinging that way before they assassinated him. So there's always, I don't know the situation as you do. I don't live there. I don't absorb it through my skin like you do. But in Canada, it's a similar situation where the left is extremely weak. My party is sort of half joined this NATO thing. It's neither here nor there, which is disappointing, but I'm not. And the rest of the left has just fallen over flat supporting NATO and condemning Russia. So it's the same. I mean, we have a stronger left orientation in the general public here because we've always had socialized medicine, although they're trying to take that away now. And we used to have free healthcare and free education. That's all being whittled away. But there's still this general acceptance by the public that these things are good and desirable, and they're used to it. But other than that, most people tend to have conservative, liberal, neoliberal views because they're swayed by the media, and that's all you hear and that's all you see. The left is, I've never seen the left so weak. It's not like the days of when I was a student in the 70s in the Vietnam War and there were mass demonstrations, or even when there was a mass demonstration in 2003 here against the war in Iraq, where 250,000 people marched in Toronto, another 300,000 in Montreal, which is huge for Canada. Now everybody goes along with the war. So I don't know what's happening with the West. It's same in Europe. The big socialist communist parties have been through various mistakes and propaganda being whittled down and weakened. So people don't see the left as an alternative. They keep swinging to the right. They're told the only way you can have an out from this situation is the far right. Trump or whoever you want to support. Or I'm not sure Trump's far right, but anyway, populist figures and things like that. We won't make any real change if they ever get to power.
Right.
So I don't know.
Right.
I think Carlo's kind of trying to rope you in. Me and Carlo don't see eye to eye on the domestic issues. We are, good comrades on the foreign policy issues. But last week we didn't have a host, and so we spent the most of the show just yelling at each other. But don't get sucked in, Chris. Stay above the fray. No, I mean I always want to get someone on my side against him, but he's probably going to get you against me. So we might as well.
Yeah, well, like I say, I support any socialist in the United States or here, as opposed to the other two parties you have. I mean, it's strange to us in Canada that you only have two parties.
Really?
Both together, and we have five. Although the five parties don't have much difference between them really anymore either. They used to be.
People used to joke. You asked me about that, and I would say, yeah, well, the United States would be a democracy, but there are 13 parties shy of that.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to change gears here just for a second because before
our viewer has a question, Carlo.
Oh, okay.
You want us? Oh, I mean, yeah, we'll get back to you right after. So,
no, that's fine.
We don't do a lot of interaction with our with our few viewers. So,
Yeah.
but he's got a question. Munis has a question. A lot of people talk about the USSR resurrection. Is this a gaffe? What's our take on this? So, I don't think Putin is interested in a resurrection of the USSR. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I don't think it's in the cards. It's not what Russia is after. It's not has nothing to do with the military operation, in Ukraine.
Yeah, I don't see that either. I was in. I'll tell you a little incident. I went to a seminar in Moscow several years ago, and one of Putin's advisors gave an address there, and somebody asked him that. I think somebody from the Donbass republics was there, a representative, and said, "Is Russia going to get the Donbass to join Russia and so on and so forth, and reconstitute the Soviet Union?" And the man said, "Look, anybody who does not miss the Soviet Union doesn't have a heart. But anybody who wants to try and put it back together again doesn't have a head. It can't be done. It's not the same situation." Because we remember that the revolution in Russia in 1917 swept through what the entire then Russian Empire there. And what are now republics, separate republics were joined in, and there were battles all across all the republics, which are now independent nations. And to try and get them to rejoin and lose their independence and become part of another federal socialist empire again, or unit, so we say, I don't think that's happening, because we haven't even got socialism in Russia itself. So how can you reconstitute the Soviet Union? It's not going to happen. But it's quite clear that Russia did not want to go into Ukraine and have this war. It's expensive, it's costly, it's risks all sorts of horrible things happening.
But they were given no choice. Literally, there was no other options. Either that or just surrender.
Right.
Carlo, you were going to say before we cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, why don't you go to the other viewer's question? We had another.
It was the same viewer. He was asking about the PSL, our thoughts on the PSL. I am not going to have anything informative to say, because I really know very little about the PSL. Do either of you guys know anything? It's what does PSL even stand for? Socialist League? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either, but I'm always happy to talk about Fred Hampton.
Yes. He was talking about, the general question was about the where socialism is at and how it's under attack, and what do we think about the PSL as like the best avenue for resurgent socialism. But talk about Fred Hampton. That's an interesting and relevant topic, Carlo, if you want to.
Well, I just wanted to say, it sounded like the question was the question answered itself, that the violent, vicious murder of Fred Hampton dissuaded the left from taking the kind of action that the Panthers had taken, and people are generally the left is too timid to take on those kind of risks anymore, going into the LA courthouse with rifles and that sort of thing. That was new in American political life. Not since John Brown had we seen anything quite like that.
January 6th.
That's the only comment I'd really want to make. I admire Fred Hampton beyond compare. He was brilliant.
From outside observers, quite clear they decapitated the black leadership in the United States.
Yeah, the FBI, and that brings us back to several things that Billy Bob. Billy Bob, one of the qualities of Fred Hampton was he was bringing people together. He had that kind of ability to bring people together, and that was his major threat, I think, to the FBI.
Well, he was about his community. He was about giving every kid a breakfast, and he was a community organizer. And he was seen as a big threat because he was denouncing the government, straight up. And I guess, like you guys are saying, they made an example of him. And the left in the West, we have too much to lose to go ahead and sacrifice our lives for. And so I think that's where kind of Marx was wrong, right? Because he saw that most industrialized countries carrying out the revolution, and it ends up being in those countries that have the least to lose. Those are the people that are willing to go out and really sacrifice their lives to overthrow the system. But if we're placated a little bit, like we are in this country, we're not gonna be revolutionary. We're not gonna go out there and sacrifice. So that's one of the struggles that we're up against as the movement, is to just first of all, come against this propaganda apparatus that just makes people so ignorant and confused about reality. But then to agitate them and get them off their couch, get them into the streets and doing what needs to be done to take the country back from our capitalist dictatorship. Mm-hmm. But that's it's going to be a generation. It's going to be a generational effort. And maybe things have to get worse economically, and people need to feel good about their economic conditions before people are able to do that. It's a struggle. They don't call it the class struggle for nothing.
Right.
My question for Chris was a legal one. I'm having problem with my taxes. No, I'm just joking. In preparation for a show, in case you couldn't make it this morning, one of the things I wanted to talk about was this ConocoPhillips winning another appeal in this judgment against Venezuela for $8 billion. And my, of course, response, the advice I would give to Venezuela was, why don't you tell ConocoPhillips to go fuck itself? Until you reimburse us for the tens of thousands of people that died under sanctions, until you reimburse us for the sabotage, the coups, the murder of Chavez, so on and so forth. Shut up. Now, but that's not a legal kind of argument. I'm fairly certain it wouldn't fly in court. But what I wanted to ask you was, I don't really think there's a chance in hell that ConocoPhillips is going to see their money, especially because they stole it in the first place. The guy that was president at the time, Perez, he was impeached. He was impeached by the Venezuelan government at that time, which was corrupt as the day is long and in bed with Wall Street. And that's how bad he was. He was impeached for embezzlement twice. Mm-hmm. So that's the guy that basically sold the oil industry to ConocoPhillips and other people. In other words, he gave it to them. And at that time, 75% of Venezuelans were living in abject poverty. People go, oh, they were the richest country in South America. Yeah, but if it's all going to Wall Street and a few oligarchs, what does it matter? So what do you think the legal standing is, though? I mean, I don't know if you can make an opinion on that or not.
I haven't been following that case too much. I mean, it's true that I don't think Conoco has much to complain about. I mean, when the United States just literally seized and confiscated the Venezuelan Citgo company, the gasoline.
There we go.
It's
their gold reserves, yeah.
Yeah, and
right, gold.
So I don't have much comment on that because I can't really comment on that case. But I did note that I found interesting that the recent attacks on the American-controlled oil fields in the occupied part of Syria, where the American forces are still invading and occupying and killing people, and nobody says a word about that. That base had been attacked several times in the last few days. And I was interested to know that they were guarding, one of the oil fields they're guarding is controlled by Conoco, which is stealing all that oil. So they're a bunch of thieves. So Conoco, that's quite clear. They're a bunch of.
So they're the private industry that's facilitating the theft of Syrian oil with the U.S. government.
Right. They're using taxpayers' money to use the American army as their enforcers to steal this oil. That's what it's all about. The American army is just the armed fist of the gangsters of the control the economy.
Well, you had it right. Like the empire is without clothes. I mean, they're not even trying to hide their hypocrisy. It's just pure, might makes right with them. And thankfully, the paradigm is shifting. With an ascendant China, ascendant Russia, they're not going to be able to get away with this for too many more decades. So I think that seems certain.
No, but they seem to be really desperate with provoking China over Taiwan and pouring in more money and weapons into Ukraine and keeping this war going and these assassinations. It's very worrying what they're pushing towards. Yeah. That's why I said in my article, they're not thinking rationally at all. They seem to be locked. I mean, people have asked, it doesn't make any sense. Why would Germany and Britain and the rest of France cut off their nose to spite their face with these sanctions? Because they can't get gas and energy from Russia anymore. They're ruining their own economies. Why would they do such a stupid thing? They're just stupid. Well, they're not that stupid. Well, in a sense, but it's because they really, really, really want to destroy Russia that badly. This is real war.
Yeah. So, Chris, we got to end the show.
For anything. They don't care, really. They're willing to push it to the limit. That's how far.
Okay.
This is really worrying.
We got a hard end to the show. Thank you for your commentary. Okay. Thanks for coming on. Stay tuned. We can talk after the show if you're willing a little bit. But sure. I know our producer has to wrap it up. So Thank you very much, Chris Black. Thanks, Carlo. We'll do it next week.
All right.
America Open Market, AO Market. The best digital market for humanity is a free, multilingual, borderless market open to international sellers with various languages included. With America Open Market, you may start selling in minutes after filling out the form. Comprehensive dashboard where you understand your sales, orders, and customers is available. You get paid directly, securely, and instantly on the America Open Market. You can sell your house, car, electronic laptop, CD player, boombox, phone, headphones, furniture, and clothing. And anything on AmericaOpenMarket.com where all your sales and customer needs are met. Register as a merchant today. You will not regret becoming a vendor at America Open Market. For further inquiries, contact us at aomarket@gmail.com.